Oh boy, I am honored to be here. Got to stay in a really nice hotel last night, the DoubleTree Hotel, and because I was sitting there alone, I was starting to think, how did they name this hotel, the DoubleTree Hotel? And imagined a conference room full of these big wigs saying, we're going to start a new hotel. We need some suggestions of what to name it. Quiet, and some young whippersnapper just graduated from UCLA says, I know, let's name it Tree. Tree, everybody, oh, that's terrible. What does that got to do with a hotel? Come on, people, put your heads together. Come up with something creative. Some more thought. Finally, somebody graduated from USC. I know. We'll call it DoubleTree. Yes, that's it, DoubleTree. And so it was. Now, if they had come to me, I would have said, call it Triple Tree. I like that Triple Tree. It just sounds better than DoubleTree. But there you go. For a year, I have known of the possibility of coming to spend a Sunday morning with you. And it's finally worked out, and I'm just so delighted to be here. You are something you probably don't know of. I mean, your congregation is actually known throughout the country. And I want to bring to you today a message of encouragement, a message of hope. There will be some challenge along the way, but I want you to see the power of you being here together this morning. Now, I am aware that most of you have no idea who I am, so I want to start by just giving you a little bit of background about myself. And I'm going to do that by going back to the mid-1990s. Here I was living what I perceived to be the American dream. I was a young professor, had gotten my PhD a couple of years earlier, married, had 2 children. We had just bought our first home. I was teaching at a university I really enjoyed teaching at. Our home was in this little suburb of this little community called St. Cloud, Minnesota. St. Cloud, Minnesota was special to us because it was about 35 miles from where my wife and I grew up. So essentially we were home. What I didn't know at the time was also that we were living in the whitest metropolitan area of the United States at that time, 99% white, the people of St. Cloud and surrounding suburbs. So, big deal, didn't care. Race meant really nothing to me. It was something I saw on TV, something that I have to admit I found irritating when I heard people yelling and screaming on the television about this thing called race. I remember thinking often, come on, get on with it. Just leave it alone. That's in the past. We were going to church, got to meet one of the elders, and one of the elders invited me to something that was fairly new at the time called Promise Keepers Movement. It was a movement across the nation for men, calling men to be better at the things that they are to do, husbands, fathers, members of churches, and so on. There were 7 promises. So when you go to this event, and these events were held in big stadiums, right? And they would have the speaker down in kind of the middle on maybe the 50-yard line, and men all around, maybe 60, 70,000. And each speaker would come out, give a dynamic speech about one of the 7 promises. So remember, the first is how to be a better husband. They started with that. How to be a better husband. After that speaker was done, the host comes out, the MC, and he says, men, you were handed when you came in this morning booklets. Open those booklets up, and I want you to write what you heard God say to you this morning through that talk about how to be better husbands. What did God communicate to you? So I wrote down this: race grieves me. And I remember writing it down and then like, what? There was nothing said about race whatsoever, but that's what I wrote. It felt like it didn't come from me. Next talk, how to be a better father. Next talk, how to be a better father. Men, what did God say to you through that talk? Racial division grieves me, hurts me, it must be addressed. No matter what they talked about, when I wrote down what I heard, it was about race. Now, keep in mind, to me, at this point, race means nothing. I was almost scared because I didn't know what was happening. And I would describe it as what we read about in Acts 2, where tongues of fire came over me. I truly felt like I wasn't in my body, like I was standing up there watching my body do things. Now, I like to use this example when I'm in California. Alternatively, it felt like God picked me up, glued my feet to a surfboard, and shoved me out. And there I went. And I was just going along for the ride, but I wasn't really controlling it. God seemed to be doing something. The conference ended. I went to the book table. One of the 7 promises, the last one they covered, by the way, is what they call racial reconciliation. So it was like all leading up to that. That talk was powerful for me, blew me away. I went to the book table and I bought every single book that was on race and religion. Went home, I read for 72 hours straight. If you put that in together, I was up for three days straight, 3 days and nights. I read every single page. I closed the last book after I finished the last page, and I went to sleep. I slept deeply. I slept for a very long time. During that sleep, something else strange happened to me, which almost never happens to me otherwise. I got a very clear vision of what our family was to do. A very clear vision, but the vision scared me. So what I did was not say anything to my wife. I thought, well, maybe, you have dreams and then you kind of forget about them, but this wouldn't go away. So after a day or two, I finally said to my 5-month pregnant wife, you might want to sit down for this. I got something to tell you. And I said, here's what God has said. God has said that until he tells us otherwise, we are to live as the racial minority, our family. I said, as far as I can tell, that means we have to move to live in a different neighborhood, and it won't be able to be in St. Cloud, Minnesota, because there is no diversity here. So it means we're going to change jobs. It means we're going to be the racial minority where we go to church. It means our children will be the racial minority where they go to school. My wife looked at me, just kind of in silence, and then she burst into tears. I asked her last night for the first time in 20-some years, why did you burst into tears? What were you thinking at that point when I said that? And she said, I realized this had to be God because you would never say something like that. And because it had to be God, that meant we actually had to do this. And so she too was a little overwhelmed by it. Both of us are from rural Minnesota, grew up in a town of 1,700. And I actually exaggerate there because I grew up in the town. My wife grew up on a farm 7 miles away. So this just made no sense. Well, we knew if this really was God's call, then God would orchestrate it. Within a couple of weeks, an advertisement came for a new faculty position at a different university, describing in its description what it is you had to be able to teach and research. Exactly my specialties. I read it and I knew, here it goes. This job, I'm going to get this job. We're going to move. In this case, this position was in Minneapolis. So indeed, I got the job. God started working all kinds of miracles using connections, things coming out of the woodwork that we ended up living in an African-American community in Minneapolis. A number of set of other connections and miracles of our children going to school where there were 95% people of color. And our church, I love this, our pastor had just immigrated or migrated from rural Mississippi to start a church. It's kind of like your pastor, right? So we're connected that way. All right. So here's what happened to us. We were in total culture shock. We were overwhelmed. We couldn't believe the things we were seeing. We didn't know how to make sense of them. But all we know is that this is what God had called us to do. And part of what God did through all of this is he made for us incredibly deep relationships like we never had before. But he also lifted a veil that I'll use. It'll be offensive to some, but the veil called whiteness. A way of interpreting the world that I thought was the only way to interpret the world. And it didn't allow me to see people as they truly are. He opened up the Bible to us, and verses that we had read before many a time had new meaning for us. So, in Ephesians 6, I think this is so powerful and so fundamental for us. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. So the things that we see, the things that we do, God says that's not really what's going on. What's going on is this. We're wrestling against principalities, powers, and against rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. A cosmic struggle goes on between the devil and God and their legions. and they're like kind of like, in a way, we're almost puppets. I mean, read Job, right? Job is interpreting, and his friends are interpreting life to mean one thing, but it's really a cosmic struggle between devil and God. So let's look at what the devil and God do while on earth here, messing with us. Devil majors in the D's. The devil spends all the time distorting, dividing us, destroying us, disorienting us. Meanwhile, God comes and continually works to redeem us, to reunite us, to restore us into right relationship, and ultimately to reconcile us, both to God and to each other. All right, so here it is. Pull back that veil. Wherever we see division in this country or anywhere, whenever you see division, that's the devil working. It's just that simple. It's the devil working. So I want to look at the devil working through this thing called race in this country. In this country, because of the timing of when it was founded and who it was founded by, race entered in right away. In a way, for most countries, it didn't. It also entered into South Africa right away and gets woven into everything we do, whether we see it or not. Hence, we are, in the United States, a racialized society. What do I mean by a racialized society? Just as it says here, one where race matters profoundly for our life experiences, our opportunities, and our social relationships. If you think about who you meet and who you hang out with and who you end up marrying, it turns out that's structured by the racialized society so that you overwhelmingly marry people of your own race. There's nothing natural about that, but that's what a racialized society does, and we don't think anything of it. Okay? Ultimately, a racialized society does this: makes groups, classifies them by this thing called race, and then ranks them and gives them rewards differentially based on what membership they have. Doesn't mean that there isn't variation within the group, but it means you can always clearly rank these groups, income and so on. This next slide I'm going to show you is, anytime I find 10 studies or more that say we are racialized in this area and here is the data and the evidence, I put it on my list. So in 2018, we are racialized by at least these things, and I see that there are several missing. So anyway, there's at least 40 of them. Health, death, employment, marriage, occupation, life expectancy, crime, all of these things are influenced and shaped by race. Some are amazingly important, like how long you'll live. Some are just interesting. We watch different television shows, often listen to different music. We even get different commercials sent to us because they know we're watching different television shows, so they know what to advertise to communicate to a particular group. I want to give you one set of examples. Just follow a string here. So one of the ways that we are racialized in the United States, which I think we often take for granted, is that every single metropolitan area in the United States, there are neighborhoods that belong to certain groups. And you can map the segregation or the separation of racial groups by where they live. I love to do this for LA because LA is always held up and is, in a way, the most diverse melting pot of any metropolitan area in the United States. And I mean, it's kind of the promise that this will be a place people can come and get away from all of that old-time way of segregating. Okay, so here is a map of the grand, huge place called the LA metropolitan area. And what I'm doing here is able to map neighborhoods. So African-American neighborhoods are codified in red, and there is this area. And if you've lived here for a while, you know where that is. Those are black neighborhoods. Hispanic neighborhoods are pretty substantial, ranging all over. White neighborhoods are in the blue, and then different than a lot of places because you have such a large Asian population, you get Asian neighborhoods as well. Okay, it's different ones here. So, we get segregation. Big deal. Who cares? Let me just show you in a way how this happens, right? Because people are just looking to rent, buy homes. They're not giving a lot of thought, like I don't think, to where they end up. They're just trying to find a place to live. When God called us away from Minneapolis in 1999 to Houston, Texas, I got a new job at Rice University, and the call to live as the racial minority had not changed, so we had to do it again in Houston. Now, I love to say this because so when we went there, we knew nothing about Houston. In fact, I remember when Rice University called and said, "Can you see yourself living in Texas?" Do you know what I said? No. Here I'm trying to get this job, right? And I say, no. But anyway, we hired a realtor, the realtor that was recommended to us by the folks I work with, bestseller, slick guy, hair slicked back, drove a really fancy car. And he said, okay, so what are you looking for? I said, we need to live in a neighborhood where we're the racial minority. Yeah, exactly. This slick, suave guy got really nervous. And he said, I don't think I can take race into account. I mean, that would be illegal. I mean, there are laws against that. And he said, look, if you want to find such neighborhoods, I could show you homes in them, but otherwise, my job is to show you homes. So he proceeded to show us homes. And wouldn't you know, white neighborhood after white neighborhood after white neighborhood. So we did the only logical thing, we fired him. Then we hired an African-American woman, and we said the same thing, a realtor, and she actually took us to this neighborhood. It was a new neighborhood being built, this massive, in kind of the Houston way, it's massive subdivisions that are master planned. They even right down to, we'll have 6 churches, and here's where they'll be located. So this neighborhood is many blocks, thousands of homes being built. We moved there in 1999. She knew that this was a place nobody knew whose neighborhood it's supposed to be, and that it was at this point diverse. So in 1999, we moved right here. This is the Emersons, and then these are my neighbors. And I do apologize that I knew the race and ethnicity of every single one of my neighbors. Yeah, so I could actually map that. All right. And notice here, how diverse it is, right? There's no single racial group that's even a third here. And in addition to these racial categories, of course, then we have ethnicity differences, and some are immigrants, some are not, and so on. 5 years later, I took a different job at University of Notre Dame, and it meant we had to move, so we sold our home. So I actually tracked for 5 years who moved out and who moved in our neighborhood. So here it is in 2004, where you see this means move. Here's us, a family that bought from us was Vietnamese. Now, the neighborhood is still diverse, but notice it's diverse without a particular group. All whites are gone. We were the last ones to leave. Whenever a white family moved, anytime anybody moved, I asked them why they moved. And they, of course, never said it had anything to do with race. They had different reasons. But one of the big things is that when you have diversity, the demand from whites for such neighborhoods becomes so low as to almost not happen. And then you end up over time with neighborhoods like this. So we've been tracking this across the country. You can have diverse neighborhoods in the modern contemporary U.S., but it does almost never includes whites over a long period of time. This, what I show you here, I said there were block after block after block in this subdivision. The same thing happened block after block after block. Who cares? Again, I'll ask that. So what? We live separate. In the racialized society, all these things get connected. So I just want to show you one of those connections, and this is the connection to wealth. Everything you own minus everything you owe. So here's an example from Milwaukee. This was a really creative study by a professor who actually tracked housing values for every single home in the Milwaukee metropolitan area. You'll see the dates, 1971 to 1993. If you bought a home in Milwaukee in 1971 and its price was $40,000, using all of his data, he could say, what is your home worth in 1993? If you were white in Milwaukee, your home was worth $250,000. So it's what we hope, right? Your house appreciates in value, you make money, you create wealth. And this is the main way middle-class Americans make wealth. Their homes go up in value. But if you were black, you did the same thing, you bought a home, you actually lost money, $8,000. Why? It's because of segregation that does that. Because white neighborhoods get strong demand, black neighborhoods don't for some reason, and demand determines price, ultimately. So, as I will often say, if I am using this as an example with students, they will look at me like I exist in the 1600s, because 1993, they weren't even born yet. So I have to have a more modern example to see if it actually works this way. So I asked my graduate students at Rice University in Houston to reproduce this study in Houston and see what we get. So they did from 2005 to 2015. They could get the complete data. They got really fancy and were able to statistically make the neighborhoods the same, like school quality and commuting time and poverty rates. And the only thing that would differ is the racial makeup of the neighborhood. So if you bought a home in 2005, sold it in 2015, keep in mind, 2005 is kind of like the height of things booming. 2008, it started to go down big time. 2012 or so, the bottoming out. People are losing money. But still in this period, if you lived in a white neighborhood, over that 10-year period, you had made $82,000 when you sold your house. If you're in a Hispanic neighborhood, you lost $4,000. In a black neighborhood, you lost $26,000, $27,000 on average. Our family lived in Houston at this time. Remember I told you we went to Notre Dame. God just keeps moving us around. We moved back to Houston. So in 2006, we moved back to Houston. We built a home. And again, looking for a diverse neighborhood, the neighborhood we ended up in was 80% black, 16% Hispanic, 4% other. And here's what happened in our house. So in 2006, we built it. Can you imagine building a 6-bedroom, 4-bathroom home for $273,000? You can do it if you move to Houston. We had got sent by Rice University to go live in Copenhagen, Denmark, to teach over there for at least a year, and it could be longer. So we're going to rent our home out. We couldn't rent it out for what we needed to rent it out for to pay our mortgage. So we said we're going to have to sell the home. So we put it up for sale, and we are able to get an offer for $225,000. Okay, we're losing money, but at least we owe like $220,000 so we can pay off our mortgage. But then appraisal happens, and appraisals say what the bank can loan for the home, and they say your home isn't worth that much. It's worth $160,000, given what's going on in your neighborhood. So we can only sell it for that. And then the net, as you see there, is that we lost $113,000 in wealth. As I told you, things were declining at this time, so maybe everybody's losing. But remember our previous slide. Even in this period, whites on average were still able to make about $80,000 on their homes. Now, I'm white. Why did I lose money? Here's an important point for us. That is, a racialized society is based on groups more than it is on individuals. As a white individual who is male and highly educated, I should get all of the benefits of this racialized society, but only if I follow the rules. And the rules say, move to white neighborhood. I didn't follow the rules, so I have to have the same consequences that others will have to have and face continually. Okay, so individually, this was eye-opening for me where I realized I can't individually overcome what is here. I either have to play the rules or not. Well, here's a deal. Go past that. Very importantly then, this has dramatic impacts for us on the wealth, the access to wealth. Again, everything we own minus everything we owe. When we look at this great study at the University of Michigan, followed the same 2,000 white and black families. Over time, started in 1984. The latest data is 2007. What's happening to black wealth over that time? You can see it's pretty steady. It went up for a little bit, down a little bit. I imagine after 2008, it's gone down a bit more, but it's somewhere around $5,000 that's left over as your net wealth. What happens to the white families during this exact same time, to their wealth? Just keep gaining and gaining and gaining. So that when we were looking at the 1980s, the average white had about 10 times the wealth of average African American. When we look at today, the average white has about 20 times the wealth of the average African American or average Latino, Hispanic. Why? Because wealth begets wealth, right? We just showed you one example. If homes are appreciating somewhere and not elsewhere, this is what's going to happen. And unless we interrupt this system, this will not stop. No matter what we think about each other, the system just keeps working and growing this gap. My own fear, to be honest, is at some point this gap gets so large that our nation erupts. Like it just cannot sustain this much inequality. Well, here's the problem, though, is that we know the church is racialized too. I'm going to give you just 2 examples. So, first of all, we just asked a simple question: what % of our congregations, no matter what faith background in the U.S., are homogenous racially? 86% is our latest data. Okay, so more than 8 out of 10. If you look at just Protestants, it's actually a little bit higher, 88%, one race. Now, to put that into context, what we did is we took our thousands of randomly sampled congregations across the U.S., and we measured the racial diversity in those congregations. Then we took the neighborhoods in which those congregations sit, and we measured the racial diversity in those neighborhoods. And remember now, our neighborhoods are segregated. But what this number is saying is that our neighborhoods are 10 times more diverse than the churches sitting in their neighborhoods. Or, put it alternatively, our churches are 1/10 as diverse as the neighborhoods they're sitting in. Can you imagine the explosion of diversity if our churches would just simply reflect their neighborhoods? So whatever intensity we see in society, it's even more intense within the church as it's being expressed. That can only mean one thing. This is false religion. This is not the religion of the Bible. This is not the religion that Jesus came to bring. It is not the faith. Remember, what does the devil do? Divide. Very important here. Let's go back to the first century church to see what is it that we're supposed to be doing. This is the time of the most influence of the Holy Spirit. Everything's fresh. It's a new word. It's a new way. What is it that they did? Acts 2, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and miraculous signs were happening. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Sorry for this verse, but it's there. Selling their possessions and goods they gave to anyone as had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. What else did they do? They broke the bread in their homes. They ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all people. And then look what the Lord does when that happens. The Lord added to their numbers daily those being saved. There's something about practicing the faith in this way that attracts people. Let's go to our Lord himself. But before we do that, let me give you an example of when this was going to break, this new system of being Christians. In Galatians, it says, when Peter came to Antioch, I, Paul, opposed him to his face. Why did he oppose him to his face? This great leader of the faith, two titans standing up, one in front of another. Antioch is the first completely multi-ethnic church that existed. Antioch was as diverse as LA is today. It's mind-blowing. But it's because in the system of the Roman Empire, people that were captured, conquered, whatever, would be brought into the cities. Division there was so great that they literally built physical walls. You might remember in the Bible it says the dividing walls of hostility. That's what they're talking about. Physical walls to keep the ethnic groups apart. But Christianity came and said, we're going to be together. In that time, in that culture, you express who you are together with by who you eat with. Who do you sit at the table with? And Peter comes and he sits with all of that diversity, sharing in meals and conversation together. But then some Jews from Jerusalem come to visit. And it says that Peter was afraid of what they would think, his former friends. So he got up and he stepped away from the table. And because he's a leader, so too did the others. They followed him and they created this separation. And Paul knew right away, And he got up in his face and he said, you have violated the very essence of Christianity in this move, and it will not be tolerated. Now, Jesus, I know you know these verses if you've been here for a while because your church in many ways is centered on these. My prayer, Jesus says, is not for them alone, the apostles, but I pray for those who will believe in me through the apostles' message, all of the future believers, including us. And what's so interesting is, what does he pray for? I pray that they may be one. That's a weird thing to me. One. And then he says kind of like how? Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be one. He says it again, as we are. Brought to complete unity, then the world will know that you sent me and have loved me. Look at that last thing. When we are brought to being one, when we are brought to unity, as we just read about in Acts 2, what happens? The world somehow goes, that Jesus thing is real. and I want a part of that. That's what it is. So let me ask you, I thought about this, what is oneness? And at first I made the mistake of thinking it means we all agree, that we have the same beliefs or the same perspective on things, but it can't mean that. You know, God created us differently. He must have created us differently for a reason. We're always going to see the world differently. We have different ways of going about it. I like to say, you know, no two people could be more alike in a way than my wife and I. We grew up in the same little town. We had the same experiences. We have the same ethnic background. We have been married since we were 21 years old. We've been married a lot longer than we've been single. And yet we disagree all the time, right? We see the world differently. So it can't be that. So what is it? When Jesus speaks of oneness and this unity, what's he saying? Here's what it is. He is saying, be together. Worship together. Serve together. Be fellowship Monrovia, and across your racial and ethnic identities, sit here and worship. And when you do that little question of the day, get to know each other, that is what Jesus is saying is the oneness. That's the actual testimony. Even if you think, geez, I just got up this morning, I just trying to go to church, do my duty, go have a nice afternoon. Believe it or not, this is exactly what Jesus is calling us to do, and all the great spiritual leaders. All right, so lately I've been seeing a lot. There's been like this kind of movement to have multiracial churches, but I'm starting to see leaders say, this multiracial, multi-ethnic church thing, it doesn't really do much. Sort of overrated. And I'll just say, you've got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me, both biblically and sociologically. Here's an example sociologically. We did a national survey of Americans, several thousand, and asked them to tell us about their circle of friends. We defined that for them as all the people they like to hang out with, spend time with, whether that's in person, online, whatever. We asked them then very detailed questions about the racial diversity of their circle of friends. I'm going to put on a chart here, which I classify them into three categories. People that attend homogenous racial churches, so single-race churches, people that don't attend church at all, and then people that attend churches like yours that are racially diverse. And let's look at these friendship patterns. So if you go to a same-race congregation, 83% of Americans say, most or all my friends are the same race as me, not very diverse. If you don't go to church at all, it's slightly less, in part because you have one less plane by which segregation happens. It's kind of odd. But if you go to an interracial church, only a third say most or all of my friends are the same race as me. They're dramatically different than these other folks, and it holds no matter what. You see that same pattern. One of the things we wanted to know was, did this happen before or after you came to the church? And we found overwhelmingly it was after they came to the church that they started meeting people of different backgrounds. So, let's do this here as we're wrapping up. Okay, if we want to get the full benefit of being a truly biblical, authentic, multi-ethnic, multiracial church, these are the 6 things that are outlined for us in the New Testament. So first of all is that we will have a shared purpose and identity. We won't agree on much, but we have to agree that we're about building the kingdom of Christ together. And we'll use all of our differences, which will make it all the more powerful to get there. Second, we will be engaged in redistribution. That can be redistribution of our time, our talents, yes, even resources. For what purpose? In service to one another, to help one another. I give you an example. As a college professor, I can redistribute my connections and help people get into colleges. I help people all the time with how do you select a college, what's the process, how do you write the right essay to get in, because I know from the inside what it is. I'm redistributing, in that case, knowledge to help people. Shared meals and lives. Invite someone over, go to someone's home, meet at a restaurant, whatever, and just talk. That's actually the work of Christ right there. It's simple, but it's profound. When we're doing this, a truly authentic multiracial church will continually be attracting new members because, remember, it's the sign. There's something attractive about it. I look at the growth of Fellowship Monrovia, and I say there's something going on very biblically here that so many people keep coming. A commitment to justice. How do you alleviate things that are wrong for anybody in your community? And diverse leadership. There's great examples in the Bible of having diverse leadership and why it's essential. Let me ask that you consider one question going forward. As a community, can you ask this? How can you become more active in disrupting the racialized society? It doesn't have to be an incredible idea or anything, but can you do one thing to disrupt the racialized society collectively and individually? Give it some thought. See what God brings to you. Let me conclude with this. I want to encourage you, brothers and sisters, my fellow Christians. Your very act of being here this morning and worshiping together, of praising our Creator, believe it or not, it is bold, it is culture cutting, it is radical, and you are throwing water on Satan's fire as you do this. Praise the Lord. So do not ever underestimate what you have here. Don't underestimate it. Don't sell it short. Pursue it, pray for it, desire it, seek it. Let me close with prayer. Oh, Father, how incredible you are. We see what you say, that there's this cosmic struggle. We acknowledge we don't know everything that goes on at that level, but we ask that you would give us eyes to see. We ask that you would help us overcome what the devil works on to separate us and keep us together. Let us not give up on each other, just as you do not give up on us. We're so grateful, Father. Thank you in your precious and your holy name. Amen.